We're good.
Hello, everyone. I call the February 5th, 2024 Charlottesville City Council meeting to order. Ms. Thomas, will you please call the roll?
Councillor Oshrin?
Here.
Councillor Payne?
Here.
Vice Mayor Pinkston?
Here.
Councillor Snook?
Here.
Mayor Wade?
Here. Is there a motion to approve or amend the agenda?
I would move to amend the agenda if that's okay with everyone. The item 6, which is on the consent agenda, resolution of appropriation to amend the FY24 budget, second reading. I would like to have a little more conversation about that, if it's possible to just move it to the regular business.
Second.
Okay. Is there any discussion on that? So we're going to pass a vote on the agenda, noting the exception that Brian just noted.
So that would go at the end of the action items.
Okay. So can we cast our vote? Madam Clerk? Okay. Okay, this meeting will be divided into three main sections. The first is a work session to hear and discuss presentations that do not require a council vote, followed by a closed meeting, and then council will have a business meeting at 6:30. The first items for report is development review procedures manual. Mr. Freeze?
So we're going to flip the schedule just for the purpose of managing time. So Mr. Williams, our housing program manager, is going to go first. Alex, were you adding anything in presentation mode? All right, so Alex DiCafuna will speak first.
Is this item number 2 or 3?
Two. So
Okay.
we'll do 2, 3, and then go back to 1 so that we can leave the balance of the time for further discussion.
Good afternoon, councilors, mayor, city manager, and his deputies, the public. This afternoon, we'll be presenting the ADU manual, which is essentially clarification of what's in the ADU ordinance that was adopted with the development code by the city council last December 18th, 2023. Essentially, with that ADU manual, which will become effective if council ratifies that this afternoon on February 19, it will essentially guide the implementation of the ADU provisions in the development code. So with that in mind, we have our presenter tonight, it's Antoine Williams, who is the our housing programs manager. And we also have with us tonight, just in case there are several questions arising that may need consultant clarification. Kyle is also on hand to answer City Council's questions tonight. So with that in mind, I will turn it over to our housing manager. Antoine.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, Council. Mayor Wade, Mr. City Manager.
Good evening.
Good evening. Executive team, members of the public, and those joining us online. It's my pleasure to introduce and discuss this item before you, the Charlottesville Affordable Dwelling Unit Monitoring and Procedures Manual. Let me see. Okay. There we go. First, I would like to start by emphasizing how much of the work as it associates with the strategic outcome area is foundational to everything we'll be doing moving forward. So that statement is stated there, and we will constantly keep that before us. Tonight's presentation won't depart from the template of the staff report too much. We'll go over background discussion. These 3 questions that were presented to staff to make sure that we provided enough information to at least cover that, and we will. We'll take a 1-minute flashback to discuss very briefly anti-displacement measures. That topic will get discussed a little bit more at length in the next item that I'll be presenting. And then we'll highlight where the ADU aligns with the vision and strategic plan, and we'll discuss very briefly our commitments around community engagement and the budgetary impact and recommendations. The last, say, alignment with the city vision and community engagement and budgetary impact will be discussed on one slide. A little background, consistent with what's in the staff report and packet. This action follows the action that was taken up by council on December 18th, 2023. The measure included reordaining Chapter 34 and basically constituting a new affordable dwelling units ordinance and program. Following that, in conjunction with that, council made the determination to defer adoption of the manual to allow staff to harmonize the manual with the ordinance, which is a foundational focus of why we're here today, is to make sure that the manual, at the end of the day, aligns with what was determined so far. Before coming before you today, we also met with our Housing Advisory Committee. We had a chance to provide some final feedback and considerable suggestions for us to consider for the manual final draft that you have in front of you. So our first point of discussion is, what is the manual? The manual serves as a user-friendly guide aimed to ensuring alignment with the new ordinance, as I spoke to earlier. It clarifies requirements and processes related to affordable dwelling units and offers guidance to internal staff and external stakeholders. The intent of the manual is to be both an internal and public-facing document in that the ordinance in and of itself isn't self-effectuating. In fact, there's areas of the ordinance, section 422, right, that refers directly to the manual as providing clarification or guidance on a certain procedure. So it's important to note that the ordinance is, the manual is also responsive and subordinate to the ordinance. So further in that point, what is the purpose and significance? Facilitating compliance for all stakeholder groups, from applicants, plans review, internal resource for staff, external resources for would-be developers or residents that are interested in how the program would apply. And again, the emphasis is on making sure the manual aligns with the ordinance. Very important part of today's discussion. Did I skip one? No. Okay. Sorry. What are our next steps for staff? We have the publication of the manual upon its adoption, which will occur concurrently with the effectuation date of the actual ordinance. Some further user education, further community engagement, monitoring and evaluation, and continuous evaluation of staff capacity. And then connected with this is the implementation of the Housing Equity and Anti-Displacement Toolkit project. The emphasis with that is to concentrate several measures to be effective in areas of our communities, zones that have been identified as sensitive or have unique vulnerabilities to deploy these programs, that they're not operating sort of in a one-off, but they're working in alignment and in support with the new ordinance, which is a huge important tool in your toolbox now, and also to further the aims of the Affordable Housing Plan and the Comprehensive Plan. So if I can use this time to take a short flashback about anti-displacement, with the exception of one councilperson who joins us today, you all back in October have recalled that in that work session, we discussed broadly some tools that could be used in the toolbox for anti-displacement measures and advancing housing equity. We presented about 30, 25 or so possible measures that could be used. And at that meeting, we defined anti-displacement, which These are direct quotes from that meeting, from the minutes. And also at that meeting, as we defined and discussed anti-displacement, we presented with the question, Councilperson Payne, asking us, does the zoning interact with these measures in any way, more specifically or more simply? In other words, do we see situations where, depending on the zoning, it makes more or less sense feasible to implement these strategies? So with that prism in mind, we zeroed in on these 7 measures that, to us, to staff, based on community leader feedback, based on a number of points of information received from the community, and advocacy for these particular measures, we identified these 7 measures as the initial measures to consider for our toolkit moving forward. And they are Land Bank, or Charlottesville Affordable Housing Fund, which is in existence, and our Charlottesville Supplemental Rental Assistance Program, CSRAP, a Real Estate Tax Relief Program for affordable housing, Tax Increment Rebate Program for affordable housing, and fee waiver programs. The 7th measure, Consolidating Strategic Investment Area Implementation Fund with the Small Area Plan. And for each of these measures, again, I will discuss them more deeply in the next item. But carrying this current discussion forward, the next question was, okay, where? Where does it make most sense to deploy these efforts first? Leading our efforts, we will look at program areas 1, 2, and 3. We identified these areas based on insight from a rate of change analysis and feasibility study that was provided by a professional service consultant, contracted through the Neighborhood Development Services, that's RKG and Associates. Also through community feedback and from community leaders and homeowner associations from these various neighborhoods. And you'll see that the program areas are identified by census tract. So in program area 1, we have Rose Hill neighborhood and 10th and Page. And for these areas, we selected these census tracts because they're very high in cost burden and with respect to renters and homeowners. And so this is why we grouped these census tracts together in that regard, to hone our efforts for housing equity and anti-displacement to these specific program areas. So as I mentioned earlier, I essentially combined 3 of the talking points, or 3 of the bullets mentioned into one slide. There is no cost impact at this time. It does align fully with the council's vision and strategic plan and affordable housing plan. And yes, there is ongoing and planned public engagement. So our recommendation at this time is to adopt the ADU manual as drafted. It's a critical tool to promote transparency and understanding the ADU program. The effort for the manual is to, again, simplify complexities of the ordinance, and that it further distills and details procedures and expectations on the part of all users. The approval of the ADU manual, along with the proposed work actions outlined in Section C and community engagement of the staff report, will work towards the goals of promoting housing equity, combating negative development trends, and reducing risk of displacement in areas where where there's potential implications. And we are now at the point for questions and follow-up. Excuse me.
Yeah. So are there questions or comments?
Is this a time for questions about specifics in the Affordable Dwelling Unit Monitoring Procedures Manual that was given to us, or?
Yes.
Okay. I had sent an email to Mr. Freeze earlier today about what I think is probably a typo someplace in Figure 1 Do you know about that?
I was copied on that email, yes.
Okay. I was wondering whether we have any answer back.
Has Kyle spoken directly to the? Yeah, he's prepared, yes. Okay, so we do have the consultant online to
Okay.
speak to that.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. So the question that was posed in the email around the construction cost replacement calculations, I believe was an indication around how larger multifamily units, 3-bedroom units were so expensive, and actually there was a switch from which was more expensive, condos or apartments, as the units got larger, because efficiencies, condos were more expensive for 3-bedroom units, apartments were more expensive. And the very short answer to that is it is not a typo in the document. What the analysis produced was that construction costs on a per square foot basis for a multifamily unit, based on feedback that we were given from nonprofit and for-profit developers, is much higher than the construction cost for ownership units, whether it be condominium or townhomes. And the number in there is a blended average between multifamily using wood frame construction, where all the walls are made out of timber, and then also podium construction, where the ground floor is concrete and steel, and then the upper levels are wood frame. And because we don't know what a project is going to come into the city, we had to create an average. And so we averaged out those two, and the construction cost, particularly for podium construction, is substantially higher. The next thing that we learned, because the calculation of total construction cost is the price per square foot times the size of the average size of the unit. And so just to give you, by the way, a sense, condo development was about $308 a square foot for construction costs, whereas a podium construction for multifamily is, I believe, somewhere in the ballpark of $416. I sent James that information earlier today, and it'll have the details down to the penny, but generally where it is, and so you can see the difference. The second half of that answer, which is the size of the units, based on our research looking at recently built projects in Charlottesville, projects that have included 3-bedroom apartments have been very large, over 1,500 square feet. And so when you combine a very high construction cost with a comparatively large unit, you're going to get a higher total construction cost number than the condominiums, where the total square footage was about the same, but the construction cost was less. And so that was our calculations that we provided to the city, showing kind of laid based on trying to provide some averages. And so, as you adjust, say, if you wanted to look at wood frame only, I provided James those numbers. If you wanted to look at podium only, I provided him those numbers. And then obviously, if you start messing with the size of the units separate from those average costs per square foot, it will also give you different numbers. So we use numbers that we collected from the city of Charlottesville based on recent development that has occurred and interviews with folks that are doing development there. And those are the numbers that were put into the model that provided the numbers that you saw.
So the numbers in Figure 1 just don't make any sense. I mean, why would it, for a 3-bedroom apartment, why would a 3-bedroom apartment being rented cost $547,000 to build, but a 3-bedroom apartment being sold as a condo costs $483,000?
Well, so a 3-bedroom, it's not an apartment sold as a condo. It's a different type of construction. And what we learned through our analysis was that at least the condo development that were reported to us through our interviews and through our research, the average construction cost was about $300. The construction cost numbers based on the feedback we got was about $300. And I'm pulling up the email I sent to James so I can give you the specific numbers. Just give me a moment, please. I'm sorry. Here we go. So it was $308.66 per square foot for recently built condos. And for wood frame multifamily was $316.74. and for podium was $404.77. And like I said, because we don't know what the multifamily development is going to be, we averaged that out. And so the average came to about $358, I guess. So quite a substantially higher number than the condo number. Why the costs for developers are different, I can't answer that question. It is response to our surveys and our analysis of the stuff that has been built recently that provided those numbers. We didn't get into the details of why they were doing that. The only thing I could imagine is like the multifamily obviously has a lot of requirements, and some of the condos may not have been a traditional multifamily development where you have to have things like fire-proofed stairwells and elevators. And so those things obviously drive up cost. And just so you know, the average square footage of recently built stuff for a 3-bedroom condo, for example, was 1,452 square feet. The average 3-bedroom multifamily apartment was 1,560 square feet. So not only was the average price higher, the average size was higher.
Can you say those two numbers again, please?
The square footages?
Yes, please.
Yes, so the average square footage for a condo recently built in the city was about 1,452 square feet. And the average for a 3-bedroom built was about 1,560 square feet, based on the feedback that we got from developers and from the research we did of recently developed projects.
I mean, the problem that I've got with, I guess I understand how what numbers went into your equation. I guess I'm just trying to figure out whether there was any critical analysis done as to whether those are truly representative of the comparison. So, for example, it's hard for me to believe that a 3-bedroom apartment is going to be 50% more expensive than a 2-bedroom apartment. Whereas a 3-bedroom condo is only going to be about 15% more expensive than a 2-bedroom condo.
I understand your question. Once again, I don't have an answer. This is the information that we collected based off of stuff that has been built in the community and feedback that we got from your development community.
The problem that I've got is if we're supposed to be making a policy and setting numbers that bear some relationship to a market that is coming. I mean, it hasn't been set yet. In other words, these are units that haven't been built yet. It would seem to me that it ought to have a better theoretical underpinning other than just, well, the last year there were some distortions in the marketplace.
Well, I'm not sure I would characterize it as distortions in the marketplace. This is what the market has been delivering based, I would imagine, on demand. I don't understand why the private sector market would build something that the market wasn't demanding. That all being said is, we provided the per square foot average construction cost. We provided the average total square footage. If the city so deems, they could say, you know what, rather than using an average, let's use separate for wood frame and separate for podium, and then and expand the table. You can also move away from the square footages and say we're going to just report the average or the price per square foot based on the research, and then when an applicant comes in, they're going to have to declare what size units they're going to build. And so you can have it more customizable that way. It's going to put more work on you as a community to verify all that information and assure that the information you're getting is the information that you're going to use. But I go back to the intent of what our analysis was, which was to understand your current market and provide an assessment of potential policy decisions on how it was going to affect financial feasibility. And so it is not feasible, and I don't mean to be punny, but it is not feasible to model every single potential permutation of development. And the approach that we've taken, we've done this for a very, very long time, is collect the information about the marketplace and trying to find a middle ground or an average or a median that we can plug into the model based on how the market is reacting today and provide that information back to the community. So like I said, I'm happy to work with staff on trying to put in, like, for example, as I mentioned, you can just say this is the average cost per square foot, and then you're coming in and you're applying and you're telling us you're going to build 1,200 square foot three-bedroom units instead of 1,500 square foot three-bedroom units, and so that's what the math's going to work out to be. But at that point in time, once again, the upside is you're allowing it to be scaled specific to that project. The downside is it puts onus on your staff to do that research and then verify that that information is going to be accurate. We don't take a position either one, but I just putting some options out there for you.
What is the average of size of two-bedroom units being built?
Hold on a second. 1,050 square feet on average, so substantially smaller.
Is that for, whether it's for rental or for condo?
No, condo is 1,243, so an average two-bedroom condo is larger than an average two-bedroom apartment. But the average three-bedroom apartment was larger than the average three-bedroom condo.
Okay.
Okay. So Natalie, you had?
Yeah, to add to this line of questioning, these numbers are based off the market that we've had and the constraints that we've had, and we're using them project onto a new market with different constraints.
We are using the most current information that we could collect about the city of Charlottesville and made assumptions that it was going to be closely reflective of how things were going to be in the short term, which is the reason why we recommended that these policies be updated and these analyses be updated at least every 2 years. Our recommendation was annually to adjust for those specific issues, which is that markets evolve.
Okay, yeah, that was going to be my second part of that is how often does this table get updated? The other, especially considering that in the General Assembly, we have a single stair bill coming to, hopefully passing through, and that's going to change the cost per square foot and development output in general, and the size requirements, and all of that will change. So if that gets passed, we're going to need to revisit this sooner rather than later.
It was also the Housing Advisory Committee's recommendation to review it annually as well. So.
Any other questions on this topic? I agree, it is strange. Is the term affordable dwelling unit with the abbreviation ADU something that is local or something that is generally accepted?
It's defined in Code of Virginia, so it's common for any locality that is effectuating a affordable dwelling unit program to use those same terminologies.
Yeah, the reason why I ask is because it also means accessory dwelling unit, and it's confusing, and I'm wondering if there's a way where we could not go with the state verbiage here just for clarity's sake.
I don't know of any precedents, but it's something that I can follow up with our city attorney. And I understand the confusion. Prior to my work in this role, I came from Florida, and ADU strictly meant that.
Right.
So I do understand the confusion. In fact, my first few months here were tough because anytime.
Yeah, reading this, I kept having to remind myself, does anyone object to possibly retitling it for our specific locality, like an AU or something else that makes sense?
I don't have a problem with it's possible. If it's possible, I just know the state enabling legislation that allows us to do inclusionary zoning does use ADU and accessory dwelling unit, so I don't know if that
we
prevents
could
us.
Use the, instead of the three-term acronym, possibly go with ADUO or ADUP for program.
Something to make it clear,
Yes.
unless.
And I think that might keep us more consistent with the language in state code.
Because if it confused everybody along the way, then I think there's room to clear that up.
Question is which way it clears it up more. Does it confuse us if we deviate from state law so that only in Charlottesville will this be known this way?
I like your additive instead of reductive suggestion, where it's like an ADU-P or something where it's still got the ADU in there, but then it separates it somehow. Whereas I was suggesting something where we take out O letter, but adding it could be kind of.
What do they call it? I'm sorry to interrupt. What do they call it in Richmond or Arlington?
It's affordable dwelling unit and abbreviated ADU also.
And I think everyone's just muddling through confused.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, there is some advantage to following the the state code reference to the, to what it is. So although, so ADU, I think is well advised to continue in that, using that nomenclature to reduce any risk of attack based on whether or not we somehow intend something different. But to Councilor Oshman's point, a suffix, if you will, would probably work just fine from a legal perspective.
Is this something we should add to our legislative agenda?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't have strong feelings about it. I see your point, but I also, I don't know, if Virginia's weird, it's weird.
Yeah.
What suffix would we add to it? ADU dash?
You suggested program or, I don't know.
Program is probably most often used, besides it sometimes being referred to as an inclusionary zoning program or inclusionary zoning ordinance. Trust me, this is a conversation that even occurs at conferences amongst the practitioners, particularly those who've had experiences in other jurisdictions. If program is befitting for us to use forward, I think it's easier to operate that under the guise of the overall affordable housing program that's administrated through the affordable housing plan. So it keeps it nice and in fact, as we discuss these other tools in the toolkit, they too are referred to as programs. So it's more consistent, I think, across other uses if we say program.
Okay.
I also have several line-by-line questions from the actual manual. Is that when we're talking about this, or is that an action item discussion thing later?
I think we can go into it, yeah.
Okay. Hang on, let me scroll my notes. So on page 3 of the draft, what happens if there's a 4-bedroom unit?
So this question's come up. There are a few things we can do between now and that question coming up, is to provide a link to on the landing page for wherever the manual exists, and this particular section, there are, within this section, there are references to, for example, in part 1, the introduction, there's an inclusion of a hyperlink to be added, and there's also the opportunity to add appendices where we could provide instruction on to how to calculate for a 4-bedroom. It will follow consistently with how these figures were calculated for 1, 2, and 3. So while it's not here in the table, we do have mechanisms to get the user there, yes.
I think that would be useful. For the fractional unit, just for clarification, it says anything less than 0.5 can be paid in lieu. Is this assuming if it's above 0.5, you have to build it?
We would calculate it as a whole unit.
Be calculated as a whole unit.
Correct. Is that consistent with?
So we can do it as a fraction if it's below, but as a whole unit if it's above?
Correct.
Got it. And, okay, that makes sense. Next page,
What page are we on now?
sorry, 4.
4, okay.
With the chart in figure 3, if they're not getting as much for a 4-bedroom unit, couldn't we see this pricing scheme as incentivizing smaller units?
Are you asking if the developer's not getting as much for 4-bedroom?
Correct, yeah. If the rent is capped at a certain point for a 4-bedroom, that is, what's the math here that's determining that?
I'm going to defer to Kyle with regards to the math, but in a general sense, We do have tools to, if an applicant came to us and said our performer isn't working or our math isn't mathing, we have a tool that we could use to not audit, but evaluate the applicant's consideration. And at that time, I think that could warrant a deeper administrative discussion with either the zoning manager or, zoning administrator, if it comes to that. But Kyle, if you're still online, if you could provide some insight as to the councilperson's question with regards to the amount per unit there.
So the math is calculated. It's not in the table. We could provide that information easily enough to either append the table where it is now to include 4 bedrooms for rental, or it could be part of an appendix. It was never intended to cap it only at 3. The model went up to 3, and the table that we provided went up to 3 because our research showed that there were no market rate units built at 4 bedrooms. And so we were just trying to be brief to keep the document from being even more dense than it already is.
I think we might be on the next
Yeah,
page.
we're on
Next-
figure
we
3,
moved on, sorry.
page 4.
I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of
Oh, you
me.
don't?
I don't
Okay.
have the most recent, so I apologize. Let me see if I could find a version.
Could we scroll to
changes
that
it.
on?
I don't have that ready. I just think that just the presentation is loaded.
Oh, okay.
But if I can go back to your question, it was if it would incentivize an applicant to develop a smaller unit versus,
Basically,
Right.
just how the maximum monthly rent was calculated for Studio 1, 2, 3, 4, right?
Right, because with the cap as it is, not that much higher than like a 2-bedroom.
well, we tried to, in terms of the structure of this table, we aim not to depart too far from what HUD practices. So in that regard, in terms of where these rent rates fall for 60, 80%, and 50%, if I'm hearing your question correctly, there isn't a deviation from that consideration.
Which table are you referring to now?
Figure 3.
Figure 3.
Okay, I got you.
So, and that's working around the assumption that the renter is not paying more than 30% of their annual median income.
And I will just note, it also includes the language that if any discrepancy arises, the rent limits indicated by HUD will take precedence over other guidance and limits, which I
Correct.
think is a protection element there.
Correct. Because there will come a time where HUD will release a new table sometime before summer, and that may occur before this manual is updated.
There's not a lot of 4-room units built. I mean, when they're building it, that's not the, I know they always build one for a larger family, but
Right.
that's not the norm, is it? But maybe, I don't know, I'm asking.
Well, just in general, I can tell you, when I was looking at what was available in the market and back in October, September, in terms of 4-bedrooms, they were largely more available in the county than they were in the city, just in terms of current inventory. So if new development was to follow that trend in terms of the city's footprint, if that's any indication where that trend may go.
Okay.
Well, it used to be that 4 bedrooms was the standard in the university neighborhood because they could cram more people in to one dwelling unit. I don't know if that's still the approach. Of course, those places all get leased up a year in advance, so
Yeah.
they wouldn't hit the market, so to
Right.
speak.
So I'm actually kind of due to look back at the market and see what's available in terms of current market units and then affordable units. And it's something I can report back on later. But again, around that time, that was the pattern.
So I'm looking at time, and I know we have another big item so I want to go another 10, 15 minutes or so on this. So if we could, go ahead and get our questions in on this topic, and if we could keep our responses short and sweet if we can, that'd be great.
Will we have time to discuss this again before we vote on it later?
I think it's on the agenda.
It's on the agenda. You'll have
But,
time.
we'll have time.
Okay.
And maybe, I'm sorry, if there are like a lot of questions, if you have time now, you can send it to them so that they can have maybe time to research them before we get back together in a couple of hours. But we still have some time now.
Okay, thanks. On the page 5, there's a reference in the second paragraph, other mandatory fees charged for use of the property such as for parking or other amenities. Parking is no longer a requirement, so I guess this should be more specific. Like when it's included, right?
Yeah, I'm going to defer to Mr. Freeze on that.
Yeah, and that's what it says in the ordinance where parking is actually provided, right? It's only calculated in where it's actually provided and where there's a charge associated with it, right? So if you're offering free parking, then it doesn't matter either. But where parking is charged for, we want it included within the calculation of the affordable rent.
Right, so should we just add language here that says when provided?
Yeah, like I said, it's in the ordinance side, but yeah, it can be added in here
Okay,
as well.
that'd be great. That's kind of a long question. On page 6 about the actual steps of the home buying process. Like if we had a suggestion for a question about if they have a big down payment, how does that affect how the math works out for their monthly payments down the line?
Are you referring to the top paragraph?
Yeah.
Okay, let me read up here. So I read it pretty consistently in that whatever the sell price, note, the entire cost of the purchase, that mortgage payment and cost of ownership of living in that home still, for it to be considered affordable, must meet that 30% threshold of their annual median income for the entire household. So even if, and if I heard you correctly, if they had a large down payment, in a sense, like would it work if they're buying down the debt? Could someone still take them to the 30% of their annual median income? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, they're able to then, the final house price could be higher if they're able to pay more off with their initial down payment because their monthly mortgage payment would be lower. But this is only addressing their monthly mortgage payment. It doesn't touch on down payments. So then the math that the seller can use to determine the price of the house adjusts based on the buyer instead of being a flat sale price.
I'm not sure I follow the technical example with the math. Like if there's a specific case where someone has a sale price at X and then they put down a large payment and their payments based on whatever they end up mortgaging or financing those terms amounts to 30% of their annual median income for the household.
I guess it's a chicken and the egg of how are we setting that price? Is the price being set and then whoever can afford it tries to buy it and then we have to look at their income and all of that? Or is there negotiation between the seller and the buyer to set the price of the house based on the income of the buyer?
The household would first have to qualify to be in that category of 60, 80% low median income, right, to qualify for the house. Then from there, whatever the price is set at, again, and defer to technical expertise here that are with me, is that payment, if it's at 30% of their household income, then they are meeting the tenets of the program.
Throughout this document, there's a mechanism by which the zoning administrator can have some discretion. So would it be accurate if this did present a problem in an edge case where this was preventing affordable housing, the zoning administrator would have the discretion to decide that it, an adjustment to it is still meeting the goals of the comprehensive plan and affordable housing plan? I don't know if that makes sense, but I just...
Yeah, yes, it does. So when these things come forward, if there's anything that appears wonky or out of alignment with our intent and spirit of the affordable housing plan and what we're trying to achieve here, that can get flagged. If there's some kind of unusual practices with regards to the terms of financing of mortgages, and that stands out to the point that Councilperson Payne, that could be a consideration that will trigger a interpretation or administrative review from the zoning administrator. Yes, absolutely, that could fall in that realm.
Okay, so we'll be flexible and adaptable if we need to add clauses.
Yes, it can be.
Okay.
So I want to go back to an earlier point I made about the manual, which is it's subordinate and responsive, so that if, say, a year, 2 years from now, the ordinance is amended to reflect changes in market or policy decisions of the council, this manual has to then adjust and align with those new policy directions as well, okay? So just consider that with regards to another measure, a mechanism of flexibility that you have with regards to your ADU program.
Okay. On page 8, there's another chart, and it lists 100% AMI for different household sizes, and then 80%, 60%, 50%. But the 50% AMI is not half of the 100% AMI. Is this a math calculation typo, or is it a different kind of calculation once you start?
No, it shouldn't be. So it could very well be a typo. And
If I may, Antoine.
Yes, sir.
HUD releases these numbers.
Oh, it's not
They're
a
not
flat
always
rate.
exactly 100% math exact.
Yeah.
It's not uncommon that this happens, and it has happened in other communities as well. I can't explain to you why they would calculate numbers where 50% isn't half of 100% and 60% isn't 40% of 100% less, but they do the calculations, and these are their released tables. I would be surprised if this was a typographical error and more just how they do their math, and sometimes they don't exactly line up.
Yeah, it took me a while to catch up to the question, but as Kyle was explaining, it's not a straight flat rate across with HUD. And if you go to their website and read through their formula of how they get to where they are, it explains as such in HUD language.
So it's not just a simple percentage?
Correct. Which creates some questions of opportunities and challenges with regards to market rentals and how programs could be considered for just folks out there just doing general searches in the market and not aiming to qualify for a supported or subsidized unit or program. So your observation is very keen, and it's something that we've considered in that context.
Okay, so that this table is accurate based on HUD's
Correct.
math. Two paragraphs down, it says that the maximum, or property owners will be entitled to current fair market rent. But the max allowable in the voucher program is 110%, which is more than fair market rent. So this doesn't line up with the practice. Is that?
It's 110% of HUD's math. So it's not.
Well, no, it's saying that fair market rent is the qualifier instead of 110% of fair market rent, which is what our local CRHA allows. So it's capping it at lower than what the actual CRHA manual says.
The CRHA manual.
Yes. So it's just out of alignment with another internal.
But I think the
practice,
CRHA, and I can't speak, it's something that I will have to, it's a technical question I will have to follow with the executive director or their program teams. But I believe that HUD allows them a certain allowance to push that threshold. And I can't remember the mechanisms of what circumstances they're allowed to do that. So I think that's why that reads different in their manual. But it's something I definitely will follow up on for you.
Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure that that is in alignment.
Okay.
And then on the next page, page 9, it says there's no renting or subletting of parking space. Why not? It's right at the top.
That's a good question. James, do you have any insight on that? Is that an ordinance consideration?
I think that is something worth removing. We should try and maximize our space and
Well, I will
parking
look
management
into,
as much as possible.
I will look into that consideration for you, and I think the only other possibility why it might be in there is just to ensure preservation of a parking space would be available for an ADU and that they didn't overlease, and then that tenant would be out of a parking space if they required one.
Well, if it's a sublet, isn't the tenant letting someone else use the parking spot?
It says renters may not sublet.
Yeah.
Doesn't, if the renter could sublet, what effect would that have on
Subletting the
income,
unit?
on income and all that kind of stuff?
I don't know.
Obviously, it would be income.
Correct, but to the extent of that policy and the intent of it, it's something that I have to evaluate. It teases along the lines of the consideration discussions that were taken up with regards to subletting ADU units, and why that's not permissible.
I mean, living somewhere is different than storing your car.
Fair
And if
enough.
you don't have a car, there's space that someone else could be using.
Fair enough. I'll have to revisit the notes and see if there's a specific reason why that was included, or if it were included in the version that was initially introduced to the council and planning commission back in September, October, or if this is a new consideration.
Okay. Good news. That was my last question.
Yeah, okay. So, Michael?
I don't have any questions. I'll just say that I was at the HAC meeting, which was a very fun 2.5 hours. But I think most of their recommendations have been incorporated into this, and part of my approach to this document is that it is very much a living document. It's been amended to say that the numbers will be revisited at least annually, and I think it's just inevitable that we're going to need to see how the market responds, as well as to what our staff capacity needs are in terms of dealing with elements of this. So I'm very comfortable passing it as is, with the recognition that this will be a living document, and that is our expectation.
So that when you say then it's going to be revisited annually, is that something that has to come back to council, or just the numbers or some of the components will be just updated by staff?
I think if you look at the resolution, we drafted resolution in such a way that after council action on this, in terms of approval, maybe in the next 6 months, probably 6 months, between 6 months and 1 year, if there are revisions to be made, we can make those revisions through in the form of a streamlined process, whereby the city manager will have the right authority to approve those changes in consultation with the city attorney, so that we can delay, we can remove extensive amount of time spent on the revisions. However, if in the wisdom of the city manager and perhaps the city attorney, they think that the proposed revision rises up to the consideration of the city council, I think they have the option to make
Bring it back to council.
that decision, yes.
Thank you. Are there other questions on this from councilors before we move on to the first item?
Understanding that we will get to have more questions later
Yeah.
on this evening. No, nothing further now.
Okay, Sam, we can.
Thank you.
You doing the toolkit, Antoine? Or
Sir?
are you doing the toolkit, or you consider that already part of what you did?
It's a good part of what I did, but if you all want to let me out the hot seat, I would gladly take that opportunity.
I think we'll do that. Did we give copies?
We have them.
The toolkit?
Let's pass out the copies of the toolkit, and are they posted on the website?
Not yet. It was in the packet. It is.
It's in the
but
packet.
when
Let's get it posted on the Community Solutions page.
Will do.
I think what we'll say to the housing, I got to remember the acronym, the Housing Equity Anti-Displacement Toolkit is, I guess there's, in my mind, a sentiment that there was a series of programs possibly coming forward. That was not intended to be the case. This is a list of various program level conceptual items that the housing team is working on. And what I asked them to do was to identify what are we already doing, what is currently in play, what could be expanded, what could be enhanced, what could, with some attention being paid to it, could we consider doing something else too? So that was the first section. And then what has been discussed recently as of interest, so that would indicate where work timing could go. And then what is just left over on the list of conceptual things that have come up that may over time be some things that we want to look at. The preference here was that we would have the ability to continue this work in the affordable housing space as a part of your commitment, and that Antoine and Alex would be able to come back to you with presentations of a resolution on some items that we can take action on, come back for questions about certain things that you may want to prioritize. There has been a considerable expression of interest in a tax rebate program. We already do that, but in a very small way. So part of the work is to figure out how to bring back some sense of how to expand that, how to broaden that for use beyond just the very limited way that we're doing it. So that just kind of frames the work that Antoine and Madeline will be doing over the next period of time, I would say. And that kind of wraps up what that
Could I ask
toolkit
one
is.
question?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, so page, well, I don't have a page, but where it says target areas for housing, this was program area 1, 2, and 3.
Page 67 of the packet.
Thank you, thank you. I mean, I can imagine folks in Rose Hill and 10th and Page would be like, yeah, okay, I understand what's going on there. Maybe with Area 3, do folks in the Meadows have any sense about this effort?
So what will take place now is additional follow-up with the folks in Meadows. The idea is that we'll be able to tailor these 7 measures to unique occurrences in each of these program areas.
Okay.
The folks in Fyville, for example, their hot topics, if you will, were different and unique than those that were brought up from the other program areas. So we'll imagine that we'll hear different things from the Meadows. We may hear overlapping things, but we wanted to put forth the 7 tools that would give us the most versatility, and we believe these are it.
And
So-
know that you're not voting on the toolkit. So tonight, you're only going to be voting on the ADU manual and the development procedures manual, not the toolkit itself.
And just two quick questions. I think this is of great interest to the community, but I understand our time constraints. One of the things discussed was a small area plan, and the first one being 10th and Page. Is that still planned for, and is there already money available to do that? There's money available?
Yes, to both of those, yes, sir.
Okay. And then the second question, I think you might have touched on, there's been conversation around basically expanding use of TIFs or synthetic TIFs. If that's underway, will that be Office of Community Solutions, or is that another department?
Yeah.
Where will that come through, and is it underway?
It would come through the Community Solutions team. Right now, part of my presentation to you later is to discuss with you work sessions for the rest of the year. Antoine is on the list to come back in April, and that would be when we would earmark being able to provide some additional detail, if not enough fleshed out in regards to that specific program, since that's the one that seems to be getting most of the attention.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So this is good timing, and I'm going to speak with the Rose Hill Neighborhood Association tomorrow evening, so.
Okay.
yeah, Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor Wade, members of council. My name is James Freese. I'm Director of Neighborhood Development Services, and we're here to talk about the Development Review Procedures Manual. That manual, like the ADU manual we were just talking about, accompanies with and supports the new Charlottesville Development Code. It describes how an application is made under that code and processed by staff. The Broadly, the manual covers three major topics: the submission requirements, so what do I actually have to submit to the city in order to get whatever permit it is that I am seeking, what the notice requirements are associated with each one of those applications, and what our community engagement requirements are. So I'm going to highlight some of the key aspects of the document, but the first one, kind of overarching, our objective here is to balance between what is needed to complete the review, both in terms of submissions and process, and while also paying attention to and trying not to increase the cost of compliance. So we recognize, particularly for smaller projects, that the cost of compliance can be a substantial cost, and we want to make sure that we are addressing that issue. But I also want to note at this point that this is also going to be a work in progress, or a living document, if you will. First off, the code is new. It's new to us, it's new to the community, and we're going to be learning from experience as we go through the process of implementing this code, and we're going to need to be able to make changes to this manual as we come to understand what we need in order to review a particular provision of the code, or what things kind of work best or don't work well. And then I also want to note, as many of you know, we've been working on our development review process now for quite a while. Trying to look for ways to improve that, make our review process more efficient. And I anticipate, actually with Mr. Lyons on board, that we're going to re-engage on that project, and I would anticipate coming out of that project changes that will impact this manual directly. So all in all, I am anticipating changes to this manual coming forward, and I just want to be kind of upfront about that straight out of the gate. One of the key aspects of this manual is the concept of a final site plan being a collection of, I call it a composite of a set of approved plans. One of the key ones within that is the development plan. This is a new idea within our zoning ordinance, and the idea behind the development plan is that is our compliance review document for the zoning ordinance itself. That's how we're going to check for compliance with all the various provisions of the zoning ordinance. And we have a particular interest in seeing those development plans submitted early and giving us an opportunity to approve those early, which would represent both an early approval, but it gives us an opportunity to work with applicants while they're still at the conceptual level to find what might be the best pathway forward for compliance with the zoning ordinance. One of the good things about this zoning ordinance is that it offers a lot of flexibility, a lot of different pathways towards compliance. And sometimes it would be valuable for us to be able to have that conversation early on with the developer in a review process to identify the best pathway forward that also moves us on the city side. What our interest is towards to the greatest degree of compliance with the objectives, goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan.
Quick question, is that
Yes,
a new document?
It is. It's effectively a new document.
Yeah. So it's sort of like sounds like a conceptual design.
It's a conceptual level
schematic
plan.
/ narrative, some sort of framing of the overall project.
Yeah, it's a conceptual plan.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and, you know, on the, right now, that review is right now that review is occurring within the context of a final site plan that generally includes a whole lot of engineering work as well. And we really want to get into this conversation before a lot of engineering work, a lot of engineering investment has been made. We are asking that applicants think about things like stormwater, things like their public improvements, and how they're going to address those items. Show us where that utility corridor might go forward, or have a narrative that describes how they're going to address stormwater and what land area that might take, so that we know that they've thought through that process. But what we really want to focus on is compliance with the zoning ordinance itself.
Okay.
The last thing I'll note, and then because I really want to get into your questions and get to answering those, so the last thing I'll note is on the community engagement side, we're requiring a community meeting for any kind of special permit, rezonings, and those types of things. On the site plan side, we're only requiring a community meeting if your project triggers a transportation demand management plan. And remember, the transportation demand management plan is triggered by 50,000 square feet of development or more. And the notion is that the task of that TDM plan is to look at ways to reduce your impacts on the localized transportation and parking kind of in the vicinity of that neighborhood. And we believe there's a value in having a conversation with the neighborhood when you're figuring out how to do that. So we want to direct people to having that conversation. So I'll close there so you all can ask me questions.
Just to follow up on the last thought, so when would there not be a community meeting or public meeting required when there has been now?
So staff hosts a community meeting, if you will, on any site plan project that comes in the door today. And in this case, what we're moving towards is there being a applicant-hosted meeting for, again, anything that involves a discretionary review and those projects that require a TDM, but otherwise not require a community meeting to be held where there's a site plan review required.
So would there be any opportunity for the neighbors, I mean, let's assume a smaller project for whatever reason, however you want to define it for the purposes of the question.
Sure.
Would there be any opportunity for the members of the public to understand, or to hear that presentation, to be able to comment?
So anyone can view the projects that are in front of the city through our new permit portal. So you can pull that open, see the plans, see what's coming. And then, of course, you can submit questions directly to the Neighborhood Development Services office if you have questions about the project or that kind of thing.
Okay.
And remind me again, for the TDMs, you referenced 50,000 square feet is triggered. What are some of the other kind of major triggering requirements for that?
It's just straight up triggered by 50,000 square feet of square footage.
Okay. Yeah, because I just can't figure out if that, because my only concern is, and question was around that, is similarly, are there projects where we would want that opportunity that won't be captured under this new system? I think the projects most likely to have that need are, 50,000 square feet, a larger project, but I'm just trying to figure out kind of what, like for a sense of scale, like what recent projects like wouldn't fall under that.
Well, I mean, you can think of, we roughly equate 50,000 square feet to a project of like 50 units, residential units.
Yeah, and I'm particularly thinking, so is it square feet of, I'm assuming just units, because I'm also thinking like a subdivision context.
Within a subdivision, I haven't thought through that piece at this point, so potentially.
How was 50,000 arrived at?
Right now, roughly 50 units is where, I guess at 50 units or less, we don't today require any kind of transportation analysis. So roughly that.
Is now when you want us to do the same kind of line by line, page by page question?
If you'd like.
Some of my notes are just grammar and punctuation notes. Do you want me to send those to you separately?
Please do.
Okay. Substantively, on 2.2, on page 3 of the draft, page 8 of the agenda packet, you say the zoning text amendment must be initiated by City Council or the Planning Commission. Is there specific scenarios where one might be more appropriate than the other?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, I was just wondering about the or.
That's something that's on our existing zoning ordinance. Basically, either body is empowered to initiate a zoning text amendment. I don't think it's. Sure, right. Ms. Creasy was noting that if council initiates it, it does trigger a timeline.
Gotcha, okay. Okay, on page 5 of the draft 10 of the packet, there's zoning map amendment to implement a project not requiring a development plan. you had somewhere else that said there were certain things that wouldn't require a development review. Is this different, and why wouldn't something require a development plan?
When do y'all want to take that?
Matt Alfley, one of the city planners, Neighborhood Development Services. So yes, you basically, when you're talking about zoning on land, you have two avenues. It could be someone is proposing to rezone because there's a specific thing they want to do. That gets a development plan because you're reviewing it. There is, hey, I just think my land is zoned wrong. I want it zoned X. And so that is that's the zoning map amendment where it is just, I think my land was zoned wrong. It should be zoned differently.
Gotcha.
And not
So
connected to it.
they don't have a plan to do something, they just want to correct that.
Correct. It's rare, but it
So that
does
they can sell it to
happen.
somebody who wants to do it.
It's rare just because in the past, there's been a lot of questions from city council when someone comes forward with that.
Right.
And so we see it rarely, but it is an option.
Okay. On page 7 of the draft, 12 of the packet, for major historic review, there's for property in an ADC district or an IPP, there's a 60-day deadline for review, but in a HC district, it's only 30 days. I'm curious why it's different.
So actually, one of the first things let me back up a second. One of the things you guys may or may not heard me say at various points is that we are going to be instituting an annual code cleanup where we find errors within the code and we clean them up. So one of the things that is already at the top of that list is that the code was supposed to have 30 days for both, but the code has 60 days for one and 30 days for the other.
Okay.
It's discovered as we're reviewing the manual or preparing the manual, so we're going to be correcting that.
Okay, so that's just a typo, not a rationale thing.
I could blame that poor Scrivener, but
Sorry, yeah.
But it's one of those things that we're just going to have to correct.
Okay, I was just curious.
Old mill.
And
And
then,
notably, that error exists in our existing ordinance as well, so it was carried forward.
okay. And you mentioned a couple minutes ago about a stormwater management plan.
Yes.
What does that look like in a city?
Well, I mean, what we're really talking about is Chapter 10 of the city code, which requires a stormwater management plan. I detect in your question a very good question about how stormwater management ought to be managed in the city and what the policy should be. And one of our projects that we've identified for our future work plan is a review and update of our environmental regulations. Right now, we go above and beyond what state requirements exist for stormwater management on lots. And as you can imagine, where you have more space in a more rural or suburban location, stormwater management is a lot less expensive than in an urban area where you have a lot less space. So we have to have a conversation about balancing out those costs and see what that looks like. But right now, the state requires you to submit a stormwater management plan, whether you're in the city or the country, that identifies how you're going to manage both the quantity and the quality of stormwater coming off of your site. And so that's what that plan is intended to do. It also deals with your erosion and sediment control management. So during construction, how are you managing sediment coming off of your construction site?
But we're not aiming for like little urban retention ponds everywhere.
Well, I mean, right now, people have to come up with solutions, right? Developers have to come up with solutions that meet the state requirements and our local requirements. And that generally in an urban area, the cost of land suggests that I'm not going to do a pond, but we see highly engineered, often underground or other forms of engineered solution.
And is there any, actually, never mind, I'll skip that. On page 9, it says all plans must be submitted electronically to the city for review. That's via the portal.
Yep.
Right? Okay. For the major development plan, the shift changes at 3 or more units on a lot, but a 2-unit development is still considered a minor. I know we have to draw a line somewhere, but why did we choose there?
So that line was drawn, we're trying to allow smaller projects to go forward, basically being able to submit a plan that is not necessarily prepared by an engineer, architect, or some other professional. Right now, the rules as given to us by the state say that a project over 2 units, 3 units or more, has to submit a stormwater plan. At that point, you're going to have to engage an engineer in order to prepare those plans. And so we're lining up with that.
So state regs are deciding
State
that.
regs, our environmental regulations are driving that. I'll say that I think that's one of those things that we're going to continue to assess going forward, because we really want to pay attention to that line and where that line is drawn.
Okay, thanks. And then on that same page, applicants may request consideration to be processed as a minor development prior to submission. What are the considerations that go into that?
I think we just wanted to create that opportunity, and we'll see where a proposal comes in that it makes sense to do so. We're gonna
Just in case clause?
It's there to give us that option.
Okay, interesting. This might be another day thing on page 14 or page 19 of the packet. It says 60 days, 60 days, and then 45 days, and then 35 days. Number 3, it says complete within 45 days, and then shall act upon within 35 days.
It's a state code. This section is copied and pasted straight from state code.
Okay, thanks. On page 20, the 2.5 subdivision review starts. Does subdivision and plot review, are they going to sublot? Is it subplot or sublot?
Sublot, you got it,
Okay.
sublot.
Are those going to be reviewed the same way?
They are. I mean, at the end of the day, sublots are a subdivision of land. So we need to treat, the sublot can be treated differently from a zoning perspective, and that's what's laid out in the zoning ordinance. But from the standpoint of subdivision law, it is a subdivision, has to be treated exactly the same.
Okay. Great. And then on page 24 for sublot requirements, it says contact city staff for assistance. Is that NDS? Is that?
Always NDS for this section.
Okay.
For this manual, I'm sorry.
Okay. And do they contact via portal or?
I suspect we will take the call through the front desk, and the front desk will route them to a planner.
Okay, I had this highlighted. In final plat requirements, point 1, parking calculations are listed. Are we keeping that in there even though we don't require parking anymore?
Oh, is that state code? That section? It sounds like it's a carryover.
So we would just say 0?
Right. I mean, they can share with us, yeah, I'm sure the parking calculation, is that subdivision section, is that where we are? That's a carryover state language because the state anticipates a parking calculation.
Okay.
But
we would be comfortable.
Not an issue for us.
Right, okay, great. Page, sorry, I lost my stylus, so I have my notes in 2 places. On page 26 of the packet, 21 of the draft, it's talking about environmental assessments. What is phase 1, and then somewhere else later it mentions a phase 2. What are those?
Oh, those are types of environmental investigations of a piece of property. So a phase 1 assessment is usually a records review. Has there ever been a underground storage tank on this site? Various industrial activities. So it's a records review. A phase 2 tends to be more of a site, at least some site level investigation.
So like walking around,
No,
looking
I
at
bet,
stuff.
Brian, you probably know better than I do what a phase 2 looks like.
Actually, I don't. It
Oh,
sounds something
sorry.
very scary. I want to stay well away from
Fair enough. But in
tanks.
either case, both are looking at what are the potential environmental conditions on a site.
Okay. Thank you. On page 24 of the draft, 29 of the packet, did I get that right? How is the tree replacement plan evaluated? What do you look for? And like, what if a tree is like a bad tree?
Do you want
Sorry about that. The code does note if you have a damaged or a tree that's in an emergency situation that this doesn't apply. So that is covered in that piece of it. This, of course, is a new process for us. We've worked with the city arborist. We've looked at a couple of other localities, not in the state, because there aren't any. Well, they're limited, very limited, who are venturing into this and trying to put together criteria for looking at a tree removal permit. So we'll see how this one goes from experience down the road.
Thanks, Missy.
The one thing I'll add is the purpose of the tree permit at the end of the day is to ensure compliance. So any replacement plan is really towards the goal of maintaining or restoring compliance with the ordinance. So the main thing there is our canopy requirements, right? So if I'm taking down trees and it knocks me below my canopy requirement on my site, then what's the level of planting necessary to restore that canopy requirement?
And you're looking for it to be on that same site? Like there's not a credit system?
We don't have that built into the ordinance. I mean, again, the goal is compliance with the ordinance.
Okay.
But perhaps another topic for us to take up when we do our review of the environmental side of
Yeah.
things.
And if trees are in alleys, is that up to the city or like kind of homeowner, like how?
Depends on the
who-
ownership of the alley, and
Yeah.
that's a whole thing on its own.
Also for the future.
Yeah,
So we're
Okay.
gonna go about another 10 minutes and we can continue the questions.
yeah, I think that's,
During the,
yeah, I'm good.
other meeting.
The drafts kind of got repetitive, so I'm in a good way, like, you know, it's just different scenarios, same language, so I think, yeah, I don't need to worry about that. So those are my questions. Thank you.
I'm assuming it goes without saying, but I'll ask anyway, that the attorney's office has gone through this with a fine-tooth comb in terms of confirming it lines up with, you mentioned notification and, you
Well,
know.
Yes.
Thank you.
There we go.
I don't have any additional questions. I guess the only comment, similar to the vein as earlier, my biggest concern, and maybe this is something we'll just have to see with experience, is whether the requirement for a public meeting only being the transportation demand management plan being triggered, if that's still going to miss some things that it would be valuable to have that occur for, because I think that does provide valuable information to the public, but also us. And my concern is probably the project where they're strongly encouraged to conduct a community meeting when they're not going to do it is probably the kind of projects we would most want it. And I don't have any recommendation in terms of changing it, but I just have some concern there.
Yeah, I think that we can talk about that more, because I think that if they know, development community in general know the community, that if it's, depending on the project, if it's 15,000 square feet to get some public input, but.
What are kind of the rules now, or what do you see happen?
Yeah, no,
So typically now what we see, especially when you're doing, where the community meetings have been very helpful, has been in discretionary review. Things coming before this body or the Planning Commission, where there is a lot of good feedback. The original community meetings that we've been doing for years was mainly in place to let the community know something was going on. Our new software system will really help with that. I will say a lot of times for the by right development, the community meeting sets some expectations that are not met. We've run into this where it's been an issue where the community does come out, but it's by right. The development community is not changing because they know the rules, and so there actually has created some animosity because they're expecting to be able to influence some of the by right developments as they would some of the discretionary development. So that has caused some issues in the past, because by the time you're having a community meeting for a by right development, you've come in with your plan, you've submitted your plan, you're starting to go through that process. So really, it was in the past kind of more to keep the community engaged about what was just going on in the community by right, and I think our new software system will really help with that, with the by right. Again, anything discretionary, yes, there's great advantage when you get the community involved or something like the traffic demand.
Is there still going to be a meeting that you all sponsor where people are, where the community is notified that they can come and say something if they want to?
That's what we're moving away from. That was the old meeting in our conference room, 10 o'clock on a Wednesday.
Right.
Where you came in, saw the site plan. But that's what I mean, there was this kind of a little bit of level of expectation. It was more managing expectations because they've submitted, in the past, they submitted a final site plan. And so that is a 42 pages of engineer work, and the community's looking at it where the intent when this was set up years and years ago was just, this was by right. Here, if you have questions, happy to answer it based on the code. But there had already been so much work put into that document, the applicant really wasn't going to make changes to it. And so that expectation level it was kind of getting out of whack.
Well, I remember years and years ago, back in the Stone Age when I was on the Planning Commission, we would have those meetings, and typically the neighbors who would come would want to talk about a couple of things. They'd want to talk about screening, they'd want to talk about dumpster placement. There are a few things like that that are not make or break issues for the project, but they turn out to be important for the neighbors. At least sometimes some of those meetings resulted in somebody saying, you're right, we can move the dumpster to the back, or something like that. And I would hope that there would still be some opportunity for that kind of engagement, even if everybody comes to understand that they're not going to be able to scuttle the project that way.
And I definitely think under our new system, we're still very engaged with the community, especially on our level as planners. We have a really good relationship with the development community, a really good relationship with the neighborhood, where they reach out to us. I will say we've had probably a lot more productive meetings like that, one-on-one with interested people in the neighborhood or a few people in the neighborhood. Example I'll give would be the Belmont condos there on the old debtor property, where we've had a lot of staff conversations with the neighborhoods in their home. So we're still going to do those types of meetings as they are needed. It's just not having that standard set Wednesday meeting at 10 o'clock in our conference room. Okay. And again, just going by right, not anything that needs special use or.
Okay. Any other questions right now? I think we definitely have a lot more to discuss later, but I know we have some items in closed session that we have to discuss.
Best on schedule. Oh, you want me to say something?
no, I didn't know if it was on the,
Thank you.
yeah.
So I'll just add that James and I have had a bit of conversation back and forth, and we know that you all have received communication recently, and wanted to use this moment to have him revisit the vesting schedule associated with the zoning ordinance and more or less speak to the staff recommendation, how it came to pass, and allow you all to have any further deliberation on the matter, realizing that you didn't have a lot of time at the moment that you made the decision to accept what was being offered to you, but wanting to give you the opportunity to revisit that should we need to make such a change before the 19th.
So, as I think everybody is aware, in order to be vested, under the previous zoning ordinance, under state law, a project must have a significant government action of some form, so a special use permit, a rezoning, a building permit, a site plan, and continue to have diligently pursued completion of that said project. But a project that has only submitted a site plan, so only has an application in front of the city, does not qualify for vesting, again, under the state code. In recognition of the substantial investment of a number of projects out there, both in time, and this is investment both by applicants and by staff, we proposed that the city council adopt a resolution that would allow those projects to continue under the prior code, and we suggested 3 different dates that would be legally defensible for that resolution. 2 of those were tied to advertising dates, and then the third one was the date of adoption. I think the 2 that have generated the most conversation is the one that council went with, August 31st, and then December 18th, which was the date of adoption. The intent was to recognize that projects have been under lengthy review. It is not uncommon for projects in Charlottesville to spend a year or longer in review. And we recommended the earlier date because these were the projects we intended to protect, projects that had spent a considerable amount of time under review already. As I noted at the time, we were also seeking to minimize the number of projects that were minimize the time spent with projects under review with 2 active codes. I'll say right now, this is already generating confusion, but for both staff and applicants as to which code applies in which situation and how different, how these codes interact, because there's a certain amount of, well, I'd like a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B if I could please. That's not an option. It's one or the other. And the new code is the one that offers the flexibility that is desired most. And then finally, a major part of our overall Seaville Plans Together effort from the beginning was the creation of affordable housing. And so we looked at it from the perspective of an earlier date ensures that more projects come in under the requirements for affordable housing with each project. And I would note with that we first announced the affordable housing requirements in August of '22. So those have been out for quite a considerable period of time. The other thing that's important to note in this is that the effective date of the ordinance is February 19th. So any project within this time period has the opportunity to get that significant governmental action before February 19th. So for example, one of the projects that was submitted in November is very likely going to have its site plan approved before the February 19th cutoff. So there has in fact been sufficient time because we set back the time to February 19th. But I want to emphasize that our decision-making was not tied to individual projects or even the projects we had in the queue. Our decision-making was based purely on what is a broad-based public policy objective related to picking the cutoff date where this arrives. We were advised very clearly by our legal counsel not to use consideration of individual projects. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have about that aspect of things.
Well, I think that's where we can pick up at the next, at the 6:30 meeting, because we want to try to get back here within an hour, and we have a close one. So is that, if it's council desire to do that, we'll continue the discussion at that point. And so if we can go into closed session.
So before you do that, I don't know exactly where in the agenda we would do that.
I would just propose we add it to the end of the agenda if we want further discussion.
Yeah.
Because we do have a substantive closed session.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was we could do it like doing part of number 12 on the agenda, but yeah, we can put it at the end. Yeah.
Ms. Thomas, you have that? You know what we're doing? I'm just making sure.
Wasn't
We
part
need
of the
to-
agenda approval, so I'll have to add something
Well,
to the agenda.
like anything, couldn't we discuss it in just other business?
Yeah. Other business.
Yeah, that's fine.
We're not going to
It'd
make a
be
decision.
customary for you to take this up at the end of the agenda that you've already approved, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Is there a motion to go into closed meeting?
Sure. Pursuant to Code of Virginia Section 2.2-3712, I move that City Council close this open meeting and convene a closed meeting for the following purposes. 1, pursuant to Code of Virginia Section 2.2-3711A7 for consultation with the city attorney pertaining to actual litigation where consultation or briefing in open meeting would adversely affect the litigating posture of the city council, specifically White v. Charlottesville. And 2, pursuant to Code of Virginia Section 2.2-3711A1 for the discussion and consideration of prospective candidates for appointment to city boards, commissions, or authorities, specifically the Planning Commission and the Police Civilian Oversight Board.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, please cast your vote. Okay, the motion passes. City Council is now in the closed meeting and will return at or about 6:30. For those joining by Zoom, there will be a separate link for the 6:30 meeting. Thank you.